Okay, so when we began, we chose this image. So we began looking at the image of Amy Hubbard. She's from Winmarley in the Blue Mountains and had recently lost her home during the bushfires. While analysing the image, we came across lists of words that came to mind associated with disaster, especially natural disasters, and these are the main words we came up. But we tended to focus on desperation, loss, and helplessness. We wanted to create something that transformed those words to move from devastation to renewal.
So we explored form as a type of protective shell, something to turn the focus inwards and away from the devastation and to process the situation. I might actually just turn our video back on, if you can see that. So the shell acts as a message board, gathering messages of love, support, hope, and encouragement. These shells are given to the victims of a disaster, sort of focusing on the gentle gesture of giving and receiving. The curved form fits delicately inside the palm of a hand, cradled by the holder who's drawn in to focus on those inscribed messages.
The thought is that those who watch or hear news of the devastation unfold and feel helpless to do anything can share a message of support with the victims. This gives a small opportunity for renewal while the recipient is connected to those not necessarily close geographically, but from faraway places as well. They know they are thought of during the difficult stages of grief until they reach renewal. It is a small way for people to come together even when they're apart, no matter how far.
So we envisage the shell to be made of a delicate material, something like ceramics or porcelain, glazed in a vibrant white as a direct contrast to the blackened and burnt landscape that you see from the fires. It's sort of like a shining hope amongst the darkness, if you like. The clay is also a symbol of the earth and refers back to the idea of renewal. You could also consider local artisans being called upon to produce these shells, like another possibility for renewal.
So for our site, we thought that the location is not so much geographical as in a large structure. Instead, it is in the palm of your hands and the hearts and minds of those affected. The shell is to act as an enabler, allowing people from all over the world to be writing messages to those affected, a small gesture to bring the world closer together.
So the project aims to relieve crisis by drawing the focus away, even for a moment, from the actual disaster. The tactile and fragile quality of the shell sort of forces you to slow down and focus on that gentle curve in your hand. You can just really imagine like holding this thing, sort of a way of contemplation and mindfulness. So we focused on touch as the primary sense in this proposal, something we feel is a bit less explored within architecture. The experiential quality of holding the form in cupped hands, it's quite a difficult thing to put into words. So we imagine too that this could be experienced in silence, just for yourself reading these messages, but it's not necessarily something you need to do alone. And because it is such a personal experience, you know, if it was families, maybe you could imagine them reading out the messages out loud.
After the renewal, the shell remains a little memento to be kept throughout life and carried through the stages of renewal as an ever-present reminder of the hardship that was endured during those times. The shell is a type of shining light, a reminder of the positive support of others, and could be referred to back to when difficult times arise in the future.
You can sort of see it's just like a little memento on the mantelpiece that you can remember the situation. And to finish, we While we focused on the bushfires, we do imagine that this proposal is applicable to a range of situations, just a mechanism to show support to others around the world. Through the shells, we hope to offer renewal through collective messages of hope and support. And that's us.
Fantastic. Thank you, guys. Awesome. So I think we have 2 minutes for the jury to have a talk. So if you guys want to go ahead, go straight for it.
And we can't hear you.
Oh, thank you, Steph and Brad. That's beautiful idea. Can you hear?
Yeah, we can hear you, Patrick.
Yeah, okay. Yeah. I think it's really nice to focus on something small and beautifully crafted and tactile. Sort of has really clear conceptual clarity. What do you think the legacy would be ongoing? That can you expand on that? That it sits on the mantle.
Just as something that all through life, whenever you come across hardship, you can always reflect back on almost like your darkest days, and that you know that things are going to get better as well.
And just like being reminded too that, like, you know, as humans, we naturally have empathy, I think. And so, you know, you saw just massive outpourings of support, like in the summer. You know, people who weren't impacted but just sent messages, and I think that's a really nice thing, just to be reminded that, you know, we are all sort of supporting each other, even when sometimes it doesn't seem like that. You know, you can sort of forget things.
Hi everyone, I'm Li Sushan, and the title of my design is called The Reviving Point. I'll try to see if I okay, can everyone still see my screen? Yeah?
Yeah.
All good. All good, thank you. So the chosen site for this design proposal is the fire-destroyed New South Wales bushlands. Though a year has passed since the start of the Black Summer bushfire, the loss and damage caused by the disaster are still very fresh in our memory. With this design proposal, I intended to offer hope for those who still live in terror and grief because of the bushfire. Meanwhile, the design is meant to remind everyone of us what has happened, so we will do what we can to avoid another disaster like this. The initial concept is a water tower in the form of a burnt tree trunk. It is inspired by a news story of a wombat who shared the water hole it dug with other animals during the drought on a New South Wales farmland. I made a clay model for the design in a similar way like how a wombat digs into the earth. I propose to make this installation with terracotta, and it is treated with a special kind of glazing. The glazing layer cracks during the burning process, and when it gets burnt again in a lower temperature than the previous time, more cracks will appear. After this installation gets placed in the bushland, it might encounter another bushfire, and it would record the fire on its body like everything else in the bushland. Yes, this installation collects water during a rain season and makes use of underground water source in a dry season. Animals and birds living in the bushland will gather around and drink from this water installation. These diagrams show the recovery process of a fire-destroyed bushland. So at the beginning, it's just the black burnt trunks, nothing else. And a year after, the tree trunks started to covered by green leaves, and with the water installation placed, animals started to gather around it. And then a few years later, the trees are better recovered and more animals will appear around it.
Sorry,
To
I'm just
help
going to stop
rehab-
you. Sorry, we can't see your slides moving if you're changing them.
It's on the second one.
No, it's still on the first page.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
Okay,
you see-
now it's working, yeah.
Okay.
Sorry.
No, it's all right. I'll just make it smaller. So yeah, that's like the rainwater and the underground water connection I was talking about. And now I'm talking about like the site. So like the site, it's just black tree trunks at the beginning after the bushfire, and then they started to cover by green leaves a year later, and the installation will attract animals around it. And then a few years later, the trees are better recovered, and then like more animals will gather around the water hole. And to help rehabilitation of the fire-destroyed bushlands, the reviving point can be multiplied and connected. This recovery process shows how resilient the nature is, and it gives people hope for recovery. And, bigger. Okay. During this pandemic and even before the pandemic, people started to see the world through live streaming. It is possible to install monitoring cameras to live stream the animal activities around the reviving point. So more people will connect with the bushland and care about the bushland. Okay, that's the end of my presentation. Thank you.
We are PNK unlicensed architects. That is Christian, that's Nicole, and I'm Theo. We first like to introduce the image we've chosen for this brief, and I'll hand it over to Christian. So, oh, go back.
Oh crap! That's a Turkey. It's Syrian refugee Turkey. Yeah. Okay.
The single image that awakened the world, the Syrian refugee crisis remains indelible. 3-year-old Syrian Alian Kurdi lying face down on a beach in Turkey. The boy's lifeless body was washed ashore after the boat carrying he and his family, what they had trusted would be a fresh start in Greece, capsized. The photo physically shows no aggression, violence, evidence of war, or the struggle and displacement of the innocent people caught in the heart of the conflict. Yet it is so powerful, epitomising all that is wrong with the war and so many more like it. It triggers the most basic of emotional instincts, highlighting how apathetic and desensitized we've become. And so we propose a message, a manifesto, a revelation.
We are confronted with a world that has imploded from the cruelty that mankind has become. An earth ravaged, Mother Nature exploited, peoples divided, faiths polarized. At this desperate juncture, our senses are shaken. Fractured fragments of political upheaval, civil unrest, starvation, human conflict, never-ending war and carnage, products of man and his ego, and the ongoing struggle for survival, and the perceived need to dominate. The remains of our modern world that promised a utopia, but is in fact broken and incomplete. A promise that has graduated to a wasteland of futile destruction. Pushed to its edge, life on Earth teeters on the brink of extinction and human despair. These extremes cause the system to crash. What did we miss?
Our manifestation represents the change we seek in the global psyche. It has begun a unified rebellion, reflecting on the current state of the world to reclaim lost time, the earth, Mother Nature. It heralds a pause in the race, a halt in the hunger for more, because faster, richer, greater is not winning. It comes at a grave cost to our humanity. We neglected the brilliance that emerges from the cracks, the in-between space. We forget to see the beauty within the joins. We envision a spiritual epiphany, a call for a shift in collective consciousness to alleviate suffering, one that transcends beyond the mortal self, above our fears, contempt, vulnerabilities. It seeks to emancipate souls from their codependence on social materialism. Instead, it is time to rediscover our humanity to foster enriched, meaningful, empathic livelihood. Spaces for creativity and nurturing, diversity, healing, reparation, and reconnection. We wish to rekindle the essence of who we are, distinct from the automated robotics of our sterile creations. To harness the good from our wreckage of smarts, to find a deeper respect for each other and the world at large. Our message is a defiant reclamation of lost dreams, hopes and trust, remembering our humility as a counterpoint to the suffering, to initiate discussion, to mobilise empathy and
concern. Thank you.
Hi CrossRoads, I'm Selena.
I'm Liam.
And I'm Shannon. Nymphaea, the ideals of purity, renewal, and the human condition. Kolkata has been damaged and torn apart by the coronavirus pandemic, sweeping across the world. She's been crippled and left to bleed by the world community. Kolkata, in her vibrancy and life, is often known as the true capital of culture in India. Now, more than ever, the city once full of exuberance and character has been strangled with its many citizens and lies desolate. How can we renew this life for these people? With such an immutable identity, the impact of COVID-19 has reverberated throughout masses of civilians and particularly essential workers. Doctors and nurses selflessly charge headfirst into this nightmarish landscape, called to serve and sustain the community under exigent demands in sterile, unforgiving environments. A compelling image that forced us to contend with the unspeakable depicts these isolated heroes clad in white armor, their only defense against the invisible enemy, while children gaze upon them in wonder. The lotus flower is a sign of purity, enlightenment, self-regeneration, and rebirth. Even in the dirtiest of water, it still manages to bloom as the most beautiful flower. Much like the hardiness of humans, the lotus persists even in the harshest of conditions. If to strip the lotus flower to its key constituents, motifs of hope, resilience, welcoming safety, renewal, and comfort would persist. Certainly ingredients the world is thirsting for.
Abstracting the chosen image to resemble that of the flower, our form emerged from the water as a rhythmic series of columns enveloped by a translucent shell, integrated with the lotus's anatomy. A concentric centrifugal movement is supported in an elevation by pillars derived from the roots of the lotus piercing the river's surface. They present themselves as a beacon of stability and structure, grounded in the riverbed, emphasizing the resilience of healthcare workers. The path intersecting the space shifts with the tides, echoing the evolution of our ever-changing condition. In emulating the healthcare workers' experience, the structure is partitioned with translucent sheets similar to those found globally in the hospitals. When walking through the space, we feel uneasy, uncomfortable, sterile, and caged in. The translucent plastic has similar qualities and appearances to that of the sails of the dhow boats populating the banks of the Hooghly River, iconic pieces of Indian culture and tradition. The source of the light is at its center, is obscured as onlookers try to peek past the translucent sheets, aiding in a sense of mystery and discovery. When we approach the structure, the size of the pillars and the expanse of the sheets truly becomes apparent. The piercing coldness and sterility of the space presents a tangible obstacle between us and our journey's end. We stagger, yet never stop. We must see what lies at the focal points. The plastic envelope guides us through the structure and past the reaches of the sterile casing towards the heart of the lotus, being strong amidst the chaos around it, permeating the central enclosure. Light at the end of the tunnel.
Once inside, glowing embers at the hearth welcome and beckon in stark contrast to the outer, cold, reserved atmosphere. This is illustrative of how, through sacrifices made by the essential workers of the pandemic, we are able to relish in their stability. Within this centerpiece, civilians are encouraged to participate in a communal activity, lighting a lantern from the central hearth, then releasing the floating lantern so that it may make its way down the river, illuminating the riverbanks and washing them ablaze with a sea of warmth from the candlelight, depicting the universal reach of the virus and connecting to those on the peripheral. Lanterns in Asian cultures symbolize joy, celebration, and good fortune. We can come together as a community through an activity that doesn't require contact, yet still celebrates our perseverance through hardships and highlighting the beauty of community involvement, local culture, and recognition of tradition, bringing hope and resilience to an otherwise destitute situation. This is Nymphaea, a monument honoring those fighting and have relentlessly fought the coronavirus pandemic, capturing how their sacrifices have ameliorated the atrocity of such a crisis. As the user traverses the juxtaposition of experiences, a narrative bounded by an understanding of local culture and tradition unfolds to reveal the beauty of this changing season. In order to commensurate with the importance of this pandemic, we must be transformed by it. Thank you.
Very polished performance and presentation. I like the idea. Well, you take a symbol of a lotus flower, which is universally recognizable for rebirth, which makes interpretation fairly clear for people visiting. Yeah. I also like the idea that it doesn't that the memorial can expand out in a sort of a fluid way if you're putting these structures or these emblems onto water to move away from the memorial itself in terms of a fluid extension of such a memorial, and also that you're not particularly sort of controlled about where that might end up.
I think that you're using quite a few references for rebirth and for cleansing by locating these things near rivers and introducing fire and those kind of elements. So I think that you've really connected to the elements in that way. So that's quite nice. And then introducing the materials which are representative of the current state of affairs, where we need to have medical equipment and protection, and those kind of sterile elements kind of brings everybody into the present moment of that memorial. So that's a good idea, I think.
Just wondering what the material for the towers of the monument would be. You mentioned transparent sheets.
Yeah, so I think with the columns, we did some research, and in India right now they've been transforming recycled masks into these bricks, which actually so the columns would be made of those recycled mask bricks, and then the sheeting would then be made of a compressed, biodegradable material, which they actually create the sheets from, putting together recycled PPE from hospitals.
There should be enough masks for those.
Yeah, plenty, especially with hospital littering. It kind of repurposes that to a better cause.
Yeah, and being able to, the biodegradability also emphasizes the ephemerality of the whole structure.
Situated at the mouth of Long Island, Hart Island is a creepy, secluded, and desolate place. It is, in fact, a ghost town, largely inaccessible to the general public. In its dark history of more than 300 years, the island has played host to prisoners of war, famine victims, epidemics, pandemics, hospitals, a mental asylum, a homeless shelter, a jail, and over 1 million unnamed, unmarked dead bodies. The bodies are buried in trenches 3 feet underground in groups of threes. These shallow graves can sometimes present grim and grisly scenes. Sometimes erosion can uncover some of the remains, exposing bones by bringing them to the surface of the soil. Largely due to this reason and the fear of contamination, Hart Island had been notoriously inaccessible to the general public for the most part of its history. Even family members of those buried were generally forbidden from visiting the graves until 2015. Hart Island is like the setting from a horror movie. Known as the Island of the Dead, it's a jarring and spooky place set only to get worse in the midst of the coronavirus outbreak. Let's hope the spike in the number of burials doesn't last too much longer.
COVID-19 was something that we never expected. No one was ready for a global pandemic, and no one had prepared for the effect that it would have around the world. Due to the sudden impact of this deadly disease, we began to see a rapid influx of victims, accompanied by insufficient preparation and time to consider their burial process. Many people have been buried on Hart Island alone and without their families. We feel great empathy towards these victims and their loved ones. We have aimed to create a place that represents how big of an impact these people had, while showing the rest of the world they are still honored by the community. So our design concept encompasses light to form the structure of a tunnel above ground, spanning the length of Hart Island. We want people to experience Hart Island and feel empathy, empowerment, and determination to stop the spread of this pandemic and encourage people to work towards preventing them in the future. The light energy produced will be generated from decomposition of the bodies using microbiofuel cell technology, where the decomposed are converted into electricity using bacteria. We found this an extraordinary and powerful way to honor our respects to those who have lost their lives to COVID-19, while also creating a sense of affinity when people walk through the tunnel to realize that it is powered entirely by the victims themselves.
The access point to the tunnel will be through man-made portals that act as a teleportation device between New York City and Hart Islands. We decided to use portals due to the unsafe nature of the island currently, with strict restrictions on visitations. This way, civilians will be able to gain access to the island without ever coming into contact with it or being unsafe in any manner. Along the inner walls of the tunnel, the names of the known victims will be displayed, and facial recognition technology will be presented to reveal their appearance in current time, as if they were still with us today. This proposal is meant to heighten visitors' sense of empathy for all the victims, while also helping family members or friends grieve those who they have lost. The Tunnel of Light revivifies Hart Island with a perpetual and sustainable light powered by the respective victims. We aim to give the victims a chance of renewal, where each beam represents their identity and place in the world, regardless of their current state. We would like to end our presentation with a quote from the New York City Mayor, Bill de Blasio. He stated, "The picture of our fellow New Yorkers being buried on Hart Islands are devastating for all of us. I want to make sure everyone knows that what they are seeing and what is actually happening on Hart Islands. Remember, these are human beings. These are neighbors we've lost. There will be no mass burials on Hart Islands. Everything will be individuals and everybody will be treated with dignity. We thank you and appreciate you taking the time to listen to our proposed concept."
Well done.
Well done. Jury, 2 minutes of feedback.
Must be your turn, Anthony.
No, I think that's pretty clear. I didn't quite understand the portal issue. Was that how you get to the island? Is that what you were?
Yeah, so we wanted to have a portal access from New York, and then it ends obviously on the island, because at the moment it's quite unsafe to travel there, so people can get sick because of all the bodies that are there. So we wanted to find a way that they could be present on the island and get there while staying safe while they're visiting, because we still want them to obviously go and experience it.
So what's the difference between going in portal and?
Pardon?
Boat? Why is it any safer, I suppose, going through the portal?
We just feel because the tunnel that the portals are connected to will be above ground, so they won't actually have to travel to the island physically. They won't like come into contact with the ground or the bodies. So they'll be like in this light tunnel, they'll be protected from everything, but they'll still actually be there. So we just felt like it was a safer way.
Right. Okay.
Cool.
That's all I've got. Thank you.
I just wanted to make a comment if I could. I thought it was a very evocative presentation, and I like you humanised, I guess, the sort of future technology aspect of it. That's all I had to say.
Yeah.
It wasn't a question. No.
Thank you.
I was really taken with that kind of circle of life. I mean, it's a bit we don't acknowledge or our perceptions of death particularly in Western countries is quite hands off and quite sort of removed. We don't do death particularly well, I don't think, and so something like this pandemic has really brought home how fragile life is. So the fact that you've got this idea of that, the fact that the people who have gone are actually powering the light within the tunnel is kind of makes us face up to our mortality in a way that I don't think we often do. So that was interesting.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Hi everyone, we're the Goodwins, and we're going to present our proposal, which is the Muse Show. So initially we started by exploring the notion of place, and place is not confined to a location. Place is a space bounded by time in connection to experiences and our sense of belonging. Our proposal's concept is not confined to a location, but rather set to the location's criteria. And there was always one question we always came back to during our process is what would we do if we knew this whole pandemic regarding the coronavirus and other things was going to happen? And the answer to that is limitless, making time for friends, families, enjoying the outside world, not taking things for granted. And as individuals, we tend to forget that other people have a life as vivid and complex as we do. In a way, we live in our own personal bubble, isolated before the term even invaded us and the rest of the world. And so our process started by not analyzing the site's complexion, but rather the feeling that it evokes and what triggers. And things follow, such as desperation, hopelessness, a sense of fear, emergency, you can name them up. But we figured out a pattern where we might reverse the script. And what we tried to do was create a content where we put the pictures of the pandemics first before we put the pre-pandemic pictures, which would evoke a totally different feeling from the before and after pictures. And this in turn will create a sense of being hopeful and a refined sense of a reimagined future. And we've established our concept into 3 variables, which is reminisce the past, reflect the present, and reimagine the future. And our focus is to stimulate visualization content of the future. In other terms, a reimagined ideal future. And this poses questions for us. How did we communicate? How did we balance our life activities, interactions with communities? How did we breathe air? And currently, how do we feel about these questions? And as a way to visualize our project, we chose New York as our platform. And New York is experiencing this pandemic worse than most in the world, along with the ongoing racial protests and other things. as a big city in the US, the city is characterized significantly for its social street life, and it keeps the city moving, literally. And there's a core value to the streets of New York that has been obviously been taken away due to the current climate of the pandemic. And so with our proposal, we wanted to enable a sense of unity in people. And we wanted to give the ability to experience this event in togetherness and also experience it in their own private spaces. And the purpose of the event is to answer the continuous question again, what would we do if we knew? And all the trigger intent is as a reflection and reminiscence. The manner in which we chose to evoke these emotions is executed by skylight visuals, sky content projections, and street projections of altered past and reimagined future. And this event is not confined to a place, or as it is adjusted to the location that we adjusted to. And the street projections are meant to visualize the ideal future, altered past, which would visualize the alternative social life of New Yorkers in a manner in which heightened awareness. Furthermore, this will also project the street life of New York, discarding our old, isolated, and ignorant mindsets. And the street projections taken form as a message behind the beauty, form, and beat of this event. And the projections are located in the skies will also include light shows as a form of beauty and form, followed with symbiotic music as a beat to it, and a platform to share stories along with past delighted memories of participants and people. And the purpose of it being put in the skies is to evoke togetherness from the confined individual spaces, and to also capture a direct sensation and enforcing a reformed state of comfort and a hopeful continuity of a future past this whole pandemic. And this is the small visual representation of our proposal with our own composed music.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'll go first this time, if that's okay. Thank you very much, the Goodwins, for that presentation. Beautiful concept and beautiful idea about expanding people's experiential sense of their empty cities. I think a concept that's quite new to all of us, whether or not your city is incredibly dense or whether or not your city is incredibly small. Can you explain to me a little bit more about conceptually how it works? The presentation was great, and I really liked the image at the end, but is it the idea that people could essentially individually interact with this idea and upload content and I guess give their own sort of interpretations, or is it something that they may be able to interact with as an overall sort of element, or how do you see that working?
So who controls this? Yeah.
Say that again?
Anyone, yeah.
Yeah, it's like an alien being. But I mean, from a control perspective, I can see it really working. But how did you envisage that you would be able to interact with it?
Yeah, so the idea of it is
the holographic projections on the streets should be interactive with the people who are around, so that people who have access to devices, who doesn't have access to devices, also can experience with the whole event. But then people who have the devices on their hands, they can so it's supposed to be like some sort of like app where they can download it, and then they can agree on forming the event. And then if they want to share some of their stories just to evoke like happy memories with everyone, they can upload it. And then if they want to get interactive with people on the streets where themselves are at home, they can just upload like a visual like scan of themselves, and they can like project it onto the streets. And the other idea is also it's usually more fun if you experience all of this with your loved ones, but then if you are isolated from them, you can actually connect with them through the app as well, and have like if you look back at the last image, it's so they have like a holographic version of their loved ones next to them, and they're experiencing it at the same time with them. Yeah, so that's basically the concept of like having that app. Yeah. And then with the sky projection as well, that is where we project the stories of anyone who wants to share it. So it can be customable, but most of it will be like controlled by it's not most, like half, it will be like half and half. So half of it will be controlled by the event organizer, like depending on how they understand the location livelihood is. And then but at the same time, it allows inputs from the participants of the events.
I'm Caleb.
And I'm Nadia.
Yeah. And our project is titled Ceremonial Shards. So this was our chosen image, and we felt gravitated towards this because of the solemnity. From the onset, we were amazed at how much glass had been shattered. The presence of coloration in the glass meant that there was a mixture of stained glass. We also recognized that this place was a mosque. Therefore, a delicate amount of craftsmanship would have gone into the glass and the highly patterned carpet.
The trauma, we believe, was the loss of place and worship and congregation, a place where there was regularity. When people are faced with tragedy and uncertainty, consistency and normality generates a sense of safety.
The man collecting the glass as a first effort to renew the place is what piqued our interest. We questioned where this glass was to go or what he was going to do with it.
The ancient Lebanese were pioneers of glass. Though they had not invented it, they had revolutionized it through mastery of glassblowing. Their glass craft was so highly prized that ancient Lebanon was spared incursions from neighboring countries.
Due to the industrialization and globalization, imported cheap glassware had destroyed their cultural legacy. In the 2006 Israeli war, their glass manufacturing and recycling plant was destroyed. This factory produced green glass bottles for local industries and recycled glass sorted from the garbage.
Lebanon was in a state of turmoil before the explosion of the port. Thus, this probably wasn't the first time the windows had been shattered in Lebanon. In present times, there are only a few who still practice the ancient craft of glass blowing, salvaging glass from trash.
We feel helpless here in Melbourne and are cautious of creating unrespectful solution architecture. But with hopeful eyes and optimistic actions, we see the explosion of the Beirut port as an opportunity to recast a forgotten legacy through a renewed lens. Shattered glass throughout the blast site is collected and reforged into ceremonial objects using traditional Lebanese glassblowing techniques. The gravity of these objects begin to erode with their continued use. However, their ability to memorialize the event will not. We believe that a renewed state of mind is not one that forgets the tragedies and trauma, rather that it is a state of acceptance. Only then can we move on and learn from our past.
Though the collection of this glass is the start of the healing process, we are interested in the effect of everyday interaction with these ceremonial objects. Unknowingly interwoven into the way we interact and think lies our response to tragedy. The resulting consideration then becomes largely focused on acceptance. Therefore, our proposition is not an architectural space of collection, but rather gradually disappearing ceremony which takes place every day with these possessions in hopes to aid a process of renewal.
Our proposition is a ceremony that takes place in a familiar domestic setting, where the use of these objects are at first perceived as a sacrament to acceptance. These sequential scenes are a narration of this ceremony, with everyday objects transmuted into glass.
As a consequence, we begin to question our behavioral response to this transmutation. Intrinsic qualities of glass inspire awe and sense of preciousness. For those unaffected by the Beirut explosion, this idolization raises discourse around sustainability of everyday paraphernalia that pollutes our environment. In many cases, these possessions become unrecyclable and contribute to the growing waste management problem in Lebanon.
White noise of glass tunes chimes in the wind, breaking deafening silence after explosion. So fragile are our awareness of the inside and out, with only an ephemeral pain separating the two. Our contact with the world and our understanding of our own relation to it is framed and mediated by the windows of our home. Beauty and banality. Unknowingly, we participate in this ceremony of grievance and acceptance every day. How do we connect with our possessions now that they are glass? And how does our behavior change towards them? Personal memorabilia, soft toys, paraphernalia. The ceremony dissipates into normality, rituals into habits. The continued use of these objects turn them from precious memorabilia into common items. We become careless with them, a fumble, and a shatter. As sure as the sun rises in the east and sets in the west, the cycle of rehealing occurs every day. Gradually, we accept the new normal, a renewal. Thanks.
Is that a soundtrack you had in the background deliberate? It sounded like, was it?
Yes, we recorded that.
Great. No, it's really good. I was just thinking, I wasn't sure how intended it. Yeah. Mm.
Wait, are you guys RMIT Masters?
Yes.
Yes.
Right, I'm going to say that beforehand. But sorry to interrupt questions. We've got another 2 minutes of questions. So.
Just a comment, really. The images are really beautiful, actually. The sort of conjuring of domestic space and personal effects and ritual. Very, especially that one with the chime blowing in the rug and the glass. But it just also, having watched what's been happening in Lebanon and the question around glass buildings is interesting. I don't know if you know Lena Gottner's project in the city, which chooses mass over glass. So,
thanks.
I'll just make a quick comment. I think you guys did really well in terms of your graphics in conveying your messages. So, like, congrats on that. You did awesome. I just had a question for you in terms of reinforcing to us who your main audience would be. Like, who do you expect to have these items mainly?
So we kind of thought about the amount of possessions lost as a result of this blast, and a lot of people would probably be left without a lot of their own possessions. So we thought that reforging these possessions in glass to these people who have lost their stuff is a kind of audience that we that would be given to them. But yet we also believe that perhaps if we were to support Lebanon in a way, in a monetary value maybe, that they were to purchase these items as well. But generally it's the ceremony that's targeted to everyone throughout, how unsustainable all the items that we have nowadays, and how, you know, if there was an explosion, suddenly all these items suddenly become redundant and most of them are just left on the ground. Yeah.
Yeah, I appreciate how it's like a gift to the locals. You showed a lot of empathy through this process. So yeah, good job.